Rich billionaire husband takes mistress on a cruise, but pregnant wife finds them out at port. Betrayal can shatter even the strongest bonds. One moment, life appears picture perfect, a loving marriage, a baby on the way, and dreams unfolding like a fairy tale. The next moment, a single lie unravels everything. In this tale of secrets and heartbreak, millionaire Alexander Hughes appears to have it all: wealth, influence, and a poised, pregnant wife named Sofia who adores him. Yet behind closed doors, simmering deceptions threaten to destroy their world. When Alexander whisks his mistress away on a lavish Royal Caribbean cruise, fate sets the stage for a storm unlike any other. This is the story of how one woman's discovery changes countless lives forever. Alexander Hughes had always known how to make an entrance. Tall, with sleek brown hair that grayed slightly at the temples, he stood out not just because of his commanding height, but also the quiet confidence he exuded. Born and raised in a modest neighborhood in upstate New York, Alexander's upbringing did not hint at the immense wealth he would one day acquire. Through strategic investments, an uncanny knack for anticipating market trends, and an impressive charm that could disarm even the most skeptical investor, he had built a financial empire by the time he turned 30. By 40, he had more money than most people could dream of, multiple homes scattered across the country, and a private jet to carry him wherever business or pleasure beckoned. Married to Sofia Hughes, a former marketing executive turned devoted wife, Alexander's outward life appeared blissful. Sofia was the epitome of grace, a woman of remarkable poise and gentle empathy. Their romance had been a whirlwind, beginning with late-night coffee runs in New York City, continuing through romantic getaways in Europe, and culminating in a lavish wedding in the gardens of a Tuscan villa. Despite the opulence of the ceremony, friends and family had whispered behind their hands that there was a genuine bond between them. A tenderness in Alexander's eyes when he looked at Sofia, and a radiant glow whenever Sofia spoke of her husband. To the world, Alexander and Sofia were the it couple, living a life of grandeur and ease. The media loved them. Paparazzi trailed them wherever they went: red carpet events, exclusive charity galas, and winter galas at their Aspen chalet. Sofia, shy of the attention at first, slowly learned to handle the limelight. Her upbringing had been as humble as Alexander's, so she never let stardom go to her head. Perhaps that was part of her charm. She had the refined manners of a socialite, yet her warmth made her approachable. She hosted charity auctions to help single mothers and often spoke to teenage girls about balancing ambition with kindness. Their inner circle considered them the perfect couple. And in many ways, they were, at least they had been until recently. Subtle changes took root in Alexander's demeanor, almost imperceptible at first. He spent more time away from home, blaming new ventures or last-minute crises that demanded his presence at the office. Sofia, now pregnant after years of trying, convinced herself to be patient and understanding. She attributed Alexander's absences to work stresses. He had always been an unstoppable force in business, and she believed wholeheartedly that he labored tirelessly to secure their family's future. Yet as her baby bump grew, so did her sense of unease. Alexander would come home later and later, often slipping into bed with a sigh of exhaustion and little explanation. They rarely shared breakfast together anymore. When Sofia attempted to discuss the baby, a momentous event, they both had longed for Alexander either cut the conversation short or seemed oddly disinterested. He listened distractedly, as though his thoughts were a million miles away. Outside these intimate issues, the world still marveled at the Hughes couple. Only Sofia felt the subtle tears in the fabric of their relationship. Something was amiss, and it wasn't just Alexander's distraction. There was a shadow hanging over him, a tension that made him flinch whenever she tried to hold him close. Even if Sofia didn't yet know what it was, deep in her heart she sensed an oncoming storm. Behind Alexander's new distance lay a secret that would soon rock their marriage. For the better part of a year, he had been entangled in an affair with a woman named Bethany Rhodes, a seductive marketing consultant, 12 years his junior. Their first encounter was purely professional, a networking dinner in Manhattan. Bethany, with her glossy black hair and dazzling green eyes, caught Alexander's attention immediately. She exuded ambition that matched his own, punctuated by a razor-sharp wit. By the end of that evening, his mind was flooded with thoughts of her, thoughts that made him feel both invigorated and guilty. Alexander initially justified his intrigue, convincing himself that having a confidant outside of marriage was innocuous. After all, powerful men sometimes sought a feminine perspective in business. But it escalated quickly from cordial texts about marketing strategies to flirtatious messages at odd hours. The affair began in secret, hidden behind business meetings in high-end lounges, upscale restaurants, and eventually penthouse suites that Alexander could easily afford. Bethany was enthralled by his stories of corporate conquests and global travel. She was eager to share in his success, to soak up every bit of luxury he offered. And in turn, her youth and excitement gave Alexander a rush he had not felt in years. Bethany saw in Alexander the power and sophistication she'd always hoped to find in a partner. She'd come from a small town in Indiana, enduring a tough childhood where money was always tight. Striving for more, she had worked her way through college with multiple part-time jobs, eventually climbing the ranks in marketing circles. However, she remained hungry for the glitz and glamour that only a man like Alexander Hughes could unlock with the snap of his fingers. As the relationship between Alexander and Bethany deepened, Sofia remained blissfully unaware. She believed her husband was just overworked and exhausted by his rapidly expanding empire. While she prepared for their baby's arrival, arranging a nursery, browsing catalogues for the safest car seat, meeting with obstetricians, Alexander spent more and more nights away, entangled in Bethany's arms. He lavished Bethany with expensive jewelry, designer outfits, and weekend trips to exclusive resorts. His phone buzzed with clandestine text messages, his calendar filled with excuses disguised as critical business. Guilt ate away at Alexander, though it did not yet stop him. At odd moments, he would glance at Sofia's growing belly and feel a pang of remorse so sharp it nearly brought him to his knees. She carried his child, a life they had once prayed for. Yet he could not extricate himself from his double life. The allure of Bethany was too powerful. She was a taste of something forbidden, a respite from the responsibilities he felt at home. Many nights, Alexander tried to convince himself that he would end the affair. He would vow that, after one last rendezvous, he would tell Bethany it was over and devote himself entirely to Sofia and their unborn child. However, each time he saw Bethany, the magnetism was too strong. They'd meet in a private suite at the Ritz-Carlton, enjoying room service and champagne, the city lights sparkling below. As dawn approached, Alexander would slip out with a heavy heart, caught between desire and duty. Little did he know that destiny was orchestrating a far more dramatic confrontation than he could ever predict. Fate was setting its stage for a day when all the secrets, lies and betrayals would collide in a single, crushing moment, one that would change every life involved. Sofia knew something was off in her marriage, but she could never quite pinpoint the evidence she needed to confirm her suspicions. Each time she tried to bring up her worries, Alexander deflected skillfully, a veteran of orchestrating narratives that painted him as the dedicated husband. And yet, his excuses were growing flimsier by the day. Sofia's intuition, sharpened by love and honed by mounting anxiety, whispered that Alexander's absence was not merely about work. One Friday evening, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She picked up Alexander's phone under the pretense of checking something trivial, a recipe texted by a friend for a postpartum diet. Alexander had always been protective of his phone, but this time it lay unattended on the kitchen counter. With a trembling hand, she unlocked the screen. The messages were mostly business-related until she found a mysterious thread, without a name, only an emoji of a palm tree. Her heart pounded as she read the flirty exchanges, references to midnight rendezvous, sweet I miss you notes, and details about meetups at upscale hotels. Sophia felt the floor drop from under her. Though the messages did not mention a name, she realized another woman was intimately involved with her husband. Fear, anger, heartbreak, and even a sliver of numb confusion clawed at her all at once. Unsure how to confront him, she put the phone back, her mind swirling with questions. A part of her wanted to rage and demand answers immediately. Another part of her feared the stress might harm her unborn child. Instead, she decided to gather more proof, to keep her calm until she could confront him with absolute certainty. Over the following weeks, she noticed how Alexander's behavior had grown ever more guarded. Late nights morphed into nights he did not come home at all. When Sofia pressed, he claimed he was sleeping at the office to handle urgent deadlines. But the evidence she uncovered in his phone haunted her. She began her own quiet investigations, scouring credit card bills, searching for unexplained charges. Many transactions were labeled under shell companies or ambiguous references, but occasionally, an expensive dinner at a restaurant she had never visited or a hotel reservation in another state would catch her eye. She also noticed large withdrawals from their joint account. Each discovery added fuel to the storm brewing in her chest. One afternoon, she reached out to her best friend, Carla Moreno, confiding her fears in hushed tones. Carla listened carefully, enraged on Sofia's behalf. "You can't let him get away with this," Carla insisted. "He's cheating on you, there's no excuse." But Sofia remained uncertain about how to proceed. She worried that confronting him prematurely might escalate tensions, or worse, cause him to abandon her and the baby entirely. Carla urged her to consider a private investigator. Sofia hesitated, torn between wanting truth and dreading it. Despite the fear, Sofia's maternal instinct grew fiercer by the day. Her unborn child deserved a stable home, one built on honesty, not deceit. She recognized that ignoring the issue wouldn't make it go away. In her heart, she vowed to gather the full story and force Alexander to acknowledge his betrayal. What she didn't realize was just how soon events would spiral out of her control, propelled by one bold and reckless decision Alexander was about to make, sealing his fate. Bethany Rhodes, meanwhile, had no illusions about what she was doing. She was astute enough to recognize the moral quandary of being involved with a married man. Yet her ambition, combined with her fascination for wealth and success, quieted any lingering guilt she might have felt. From her point of view, the real culprit in this affair was Alexander. He was the one with the vows, the wife, the responsibilities. She was merely riding the wave of a lavish lifestyle, one she never expected to experience in her small-town upbringing. And if Alexander assured her that he was unhappy in his marriage, who was she to question it? Throughout her career, Bethany had brushed shoulders with influential men, always noticing the same pattern: the hunger for excitement, the chase of forbidden fruit, and the ego-driven desire to conquer. She had never let a relationship grow too complicated. With Alexander, however, it was different. He wasn't just another wealthy executive. He possessed a magnetism that had drawn her in from the start, and his generosity was dizzying. They flew to Los Angeles on his private jet, They shared caviar and vintage wine in first-class lounges. They danced in exclusive clubs, sealed away from prying eyes by security details who were paid to keep secrets. Deep inside, Bethany sometimes wondered if Alexander might leave his wife for her. She found herself daydreaming about settling down in one of his sprawling estates, perhaps raising a child of her own someday, though the idea made her uneasy when she remembered Sofia was already pregnant. She told herself it was only a passing fancy. After all, it wasn't her responsibility to meddle in his marriage. Alexander's promises to her hovered between the lines of explicit and vague. He would say, "Things are complicated at home," or "Give me more time." And Bethany, despite her independent streak, found herself waiting for him, ever hopeful that she would be his priority. In the rare moments guilt crept in, Bethany quieted it by focusing on her own struggles. She reminded herself of the small run-down house she grew up in, the nights she had to skip dinner because there wasn't enough food. She recalled the humiliations of not being able to afford college textbooks and the shame of using second-hand clothes that never quite fit. Through sheer grit, she had escaped that life, determined never to look back. Now, with Alexander, a door to a world of privilege had flung open, and she was too enthralled to walk away. Still, she noticed Alexander's restlessness. Sometimes in the early mornings, he would stare out the window with a troubled expression, as though torn between two paths. She suspected it had to do with Sofia and the unborn baby, but she never asked. Questions might invite complications. Instead, Bethany replaced doubts with indulgences. She urged Alexander to plan something big for them, a private escape to an exotic locale or a cruise where they could enjoy their affair without constraints. She knew the more he invested in her, the less likely he would be to leave. She had no idea that these desires of hers would play a pivotal role in the downfall of their clandestine romance. To quell the tension rising inside him, Alexander latched onto Bethany's idea of a private escape. He needed a break from the mounting guilt, a chance to indulge in a fantasy world where he wasn't a failing husband, but a carefree lover. The timing seemed perfect. He told Sofia he had a critical business deal that required him to be on site for over a week. She expressed concern, reminding him that her due date was only 2 months away, but he dismissed her worries with carefully rehearsed reassurances. Without much difficulty, Alexander booked a luxury suite aboard a Royal Caribbean cruise. He chose a week-long Caribbean itinerary that departed from Miami and visited several sun-soaked islands. He planned everything meticulously, from the spa treatments and private shore excursions to the luxurious dinners where they could sip champagne under the stars. The enormous ship, with its multiple decks and bustling activities, felt like a safe haven for secrecy who would expect a high-profile millionaire to parade around with his mistress among thousands of cruisers. Ironically, that was exactly the appeal. Lost in the crowd, they could be anyone they wanted, free from the usual constraints of business or marital obligations. Bethany glowed with excitement when Alexander revealed the plan. She had never been on a cruise before, let alone one as extravagant as this. She daydreamed about tropical sunsets, dancing the night away, and waking up each morning to the gentle lull of the sea. She also envisioned Instagram-worthy moments posing by the pool or in front of postcard-perfect beaches that she could discreetly share, hiding Alexander's identity but reveling in the envious comments from acquaintances back home. Back in New York, Sofia sensed her husband's mood shift. He seemed oddly energized, almost buoyant, even though he claimed to be swamped with critical work. A sharp intuition told her something major was afoot. She also noticed new credit card transactions from a travel agency, suspicious phone calls at odd hours, and the sudden reappearance of that palm tree text thread on his phone. Despite not being able to see the messages outright, Alexander was now more careful. She sensed the shift in his routine was no innocent business trip. While Alexander prepared for the cruise, Sofia struggled with overwhelming anxiety. She spent sleepless nights wandering through the house, trying to organize baby clothes, reading parenting books, and feeling the baby kick softly, as if it, too, sensed the tension. Finally, she could endure the uncertainty no longer. She decided to take a bold step. She hired a private investigator named Malcolm Cole, a retired detective recommended by Carla. Malcolm specialized in high-profile marital disputes, and his success rate was well known among lawyers and jilted spouses alike. Sofia met Malcolm in a discreet cafe. She explained her situation, handing over any details she had: phone logs, suspicious expenses, a few fragments of text messages she had secretly saved. Malcolm listened calmly, compassion burning in his eyes. He assured her that he would get to the bottom of this and that she was making a wise choice by gathering hard evidence. Thus, two plans began to unfold simultaneously: Alexander's glamorous tryst on a Caribbean cruise, and Sofia's quest for the truth, armed with a seasoned investigator. Neither Alexander nor Bethany suspected the trap that was closing in, and Sofia, while terrified of what she might discover, was determined to protect her child's future, even if it meant breaking her own heart in the process. Miami's port, teeming with tourists in colorful shirts and straw hats, bustled with excitement as the massive Royal Caribbean ship loomed in the background. On the morning of departure, Alexander and Bethany arrived separately to avoid drawing attention. Alexander wore a crisp linen suit, blending in with the other affluent travelers headed to their private suites. Bethany, radiant in a summery dress and wide-brimmed hat, carried a small designer suitcase. They exchanged discreet smiles as they made their way through check-in, eager to escape to their floating paradise. They boarded early, sipping on welcome champagne as they explored the ship's grandeur. Multiple pools, gourmet restaurants, show lounges, and high-end boutiques catered to every whim. Bethany clung to Alexander's arm, her eyes shimmering with wonder. She felt like a queen, far from any judgmental stares. Alexander, too, allowed himself a fleeting sense of freedom from the gnawing remorse that had plagued him. He almost succeeded in convincing himself this was merely an innocent getaway. He allowed the vibrant energy of the ship, the lively steel drum music echoing from the upper decks, to drown out any lingering doubts. Unbeknownst to them, the private investigator Malcolm Cole had been tracking Alexander for days. After reviewing suspicious financial transactions and flight records, he suspected a cruise was on the agenda. Stealthily, Malcolm followed Alexander's trail to Miami, gathering photographic evidence. On the day of departure, he positioned himself among the throngs of passengers, snapping pictures of Alexander and Bethany as they boarded together. He even managed to secure a cabin on the same ship, prepared to document any damning evidence that would give Sofia the indisputable proof she deserved. Meanwhile, Sofia waited anxiously at home, her eyes fixed on her phone, half expecting a call from Malcolm. She felt a mix of dread and relief, knowing the truth was close. She confided in Carla that she feared the confrontation that awaited her once the evidence came to light. But more than that, she worried how this chaos might affect her unborn baby. Each day, Sofia reminded herself that knowledge was power, that by facing Alexander's betrayal head-on, she would be better prepared for whatever lay ahead. Back on the cruise, Alexander and Bethany settled into their lavish suite, complete with an ocean view balcony, a plush king-size bed, and a private whirlpool tub. Bethany draped herself on the lounge chair, gazing out at the endless turquoise sea. "We should go to the spa," she suggested coyly, already planning their first couple's massage. Alexander nodded, leaning over the balcony railing to feel the breeze against his face. For a moment, he pushed away thoughts of Sofia and their unborn child, focusing solely on the present. The ship's horn blared, marking its departure, and the deck erupted with cheers. As the vessel glided away from the port, Malcolm watched from a distance, camera in hand. He had captured enough images to confirm the affair, but he still wanted more conclusive proof, something that would hold up in any courtroom if necessary. He bided his time, blending in as a curious tourist, keeping Bethany and Alexander in his line of sight whenever possible. Little did anyone realize that this seemingly perfect cruise would end in the most dramatic way imaginable. By the time the ship returned to port, destinies would be rewritten, and karma would come knocking with a force that no one could escape. The cruise sailed smoothly across the shimmering Caribbean Sea, each new island a postcard, perfect paradise of white sand beaches and turquoise waters. For Alexander, the sights provided a temporary haven from the guilt that had eaten at him for weeks. For Bethany, the voyage felt like stepping into a fantasy realm she had only read about, one where her every whim could be granted at the snap of a finger. Together, they strolled through the ship's lavish corridors, arm in arm, smiling at each other like any carefree couple on vacation. But beneath their sun-kissed grins lay truths they dared not examine too closely. By the third day, they had settled into a luxurious routine. Alexander booked a couple's massage at the ship's exclusive spa suite, ensuring complete privacy. The room smelled of eucalyptus oil and fresh orchids, and soft instrumental music created an atmosphere of pampered indulgence. Under skillful hands, Alexander felt his muscles relax, though a persistent knot of anxiety refused to release its grip. Each time he closed his eyes, he caught fleeting images of Sofia's gentle smile and the bump of her growing belly. Yet he pushed those thoughts aside, deciding that guilt had no place in this fleeting escape. Later, they lounged by the adults-only pool, sipping tropical cocktails garnished with tiny umbrellas. Bethany chatted endlessly about future travel plans, an alpine ski trip perhaps, or a whirlwind tour of Europe. She laughed at the idea of accidentally running into Alexander's business associates in Monte Carlo, imagining their envious stares as she hung on his arm. Alexander forced a smile, unwilling to admit that his finances and his personal life were far more precarious than they appeared. He kept telling himself that everything would work out, that he could juggle these two worlds indefinitely if he planned carefully. Unbeknownst to them, a watchful presence lingered nearby. Malcolm Cole, the private investigator Sofia had hired, skillfully blended into the crowd of cruise-goers. At first glance, he looked like any other middle-aged traveler, a camera slung around his neck, a baseball cap pulled low over his weathered face, a casual Hawaiian shirt that made him appear more harmless tourist than sharp-eyed detective. But behind that facade, Malcolm's gaze was laser-focused, capturing every moment in crisp detail. Each time Alexander leaned in to kiss Bethany's cheek or draped an arm around her waist, Malcolm discreetly snapped a photo. He documented everything: the hidden smiles, the clandestine hand-holding, even the gold keycard Bethany carried, marked for Alexander's opulent suite. Bethany was too intoxicated by her newfound sense of luxury to notice the lens pointed in their direction. She invited Alexander to join her in the glass-walled solarium to watch the sun dip below the horizon. As the sky turned tangerine, then deep pink, and finally a dusky purple, they swayed gently to the live band's soft music. The romance of the moment almost convinced them that no outside world existed at all. Bethany's laughter sparkled, her hair falling over her shoulders in a loose wave, and Alexander pressed a light kiss to her forehead, silently grateful for the reprieve from the complicated life waiting back home. Meanwhile, Malcolm bided his time. He captured photos from various angles, some from the top deck railing, others from behind potted palm trees or the edges of activity lounges. His memory card soon filled with images of the couple sunbathing, dining in exclusive restaurants, and sharing private corners of the ship. It was more than enough evidence to confirm Alexander's infidelity and hand Sofia every detail she might need in court yet. Malcolm also sensed that something even more dramatic lay ahead. He knew how these situations often played out. The more secure people felt in their deception, the more likely they were to slip up in public view. On the fourth evening, the ship arranged a themed gala night, an extravagant affair featuring a string quartet, elaborate ice sculptures, and passengers dressed in their finest attire. Bethany emerged from their suite in a backless silver gown, looking every bit a movie star. Alexander wore a tailored tuxedo, exuding wealth and confidence. They danced beneath shimmering chandeliers, ignoring the curious glances of other guests. Alexander felt a fleeting rush of euphoria. In that instant, it was easy to forget his responsibilities. Bethany's eyes glowed with admiration, and for a heartbeat, he allowed himself to believe that this was his rightful life, a life of luxury, admiration, and unlimited possibilities. All the while, the tension in Malcolm's chest grew tighter. He recognized the signs of a man living in borrowed time, teetering on the brink of a stark and painful reality. His job was to deliver indisputable proof to Sofia, and he had it in spades, but a more significant confrontation seemed inevitable. The longer they remained on the cruise, the more brazen Alexander and Bethany became. Sooner or later, the clock would run out. On the fifth day, the ship docked at a small tropical island, known for its lush coral reefs and secluded coves. Alexander and Bethany disembarked hand in hand for a private snorkeling excursion. With a telephoto lens, Malcolm captured their playful interactions, splashing each other in crystal-clear water, sharing stolen kisses under the shade of a palm tree. Their joy was palpable, but to Malcolm's trained eye, it was also tinged with desperation. Alexander was indulging in a fantasy, one that might never exist beyond the boundaries of the cruise. That evening, as the ship pulled away from the island, Malcolm made a covert call to Sofia. "I have everything," he told her quietly. "Enough photos and documentation to leave no doubts. I think you should come to the port when they dock. Sometimes seeing is believing." He heard the tremor in Sofia's voice when she agreed, her heartbreak already evident. Despite the tension, she thanked him. She needed closure, no matter how painful it might be. Malcolm ended the call and stared at the inky expanse of ocean beyond his balcony. He pitied Sofia's predicament, pregnant, betrayed, and bracing for a scene that would tear open her wounds even further. But in his line of work, he knew this was the only way. The truth, however brutal, was always more merciful in the end than a life built on lies. On the deck above, Alexander and Bethany toasted to what they believed was their ultimate getaway. Laughter mingled with the rhythmic hum of the engines, the ocean breeze carrying away any lingering sense of guilt. They had one more day before returning to Miami, one last hurrah before docking in reality. Yet neither could guess that their final disembarkation would be anything but ordinary, and that, in just a short while, karma would descend with a swiftness neither had ever anticipated. The morning of the ship's return to Miami, tension crackled in the air as the massive vessel approached the port. Passengers, all tanned and brimming with vacation stories, lined the rails to glimpse the skyline. Alexander and Bethany stood among them, arms draped casually around one another. Bethany sported a carefree grin, chatting about her plans to post tasteful photos online, being careful not to reveal Alexander's face. She had no idea that just beyond the crowds, a reckoning awaited. On the shore, Sofia stood with Malcolm by her side. She wore a simple maternity dress, her belly now unmistakable. Her eyes were puffy from lack of sleep, her features taut with determination. Carla was there too, offering emotional support. Sofia gripped her friend's hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She could see the mammoth ship inching closer, each moment heightening the sense of dread and finality. Malcolm had ensured they were stationed in a private area reserved for authorized personnel, giving them an unobstructed view of the debarking passengers. His camera was in hand, ready to capture the couple in case they slipped away in the hustle and bustle. Sofia's heart pounded louder than the clamor of excited travelers. She steeled herself, biting her lip to keep tears at bay. She needed to see Alexander step off the ship with this other woman. She needed that final confirmation, painful though it would be, so that she could stop wondering, stop hoping against hope. Once the gangway was secured, passengers began to disembark, eagerly rolling their luggage behind them. Families, honeymooners, retirees all passed through, and then, finally, Alexander emerged with Bethany at his side. Their hands were interlocked. Bethany pressed close to him, her face alight with post-vacation bliss. At first glance, Alexander's expression mirrored her contentment, but the moment his eyes fell upon Sofia, standing a mere 20 feet away, his face went ashen, as though all color drained instantly. Bethany froze, looking back and forth between the visibly pregnant woman glaring at them and Alexander, who wore an expression of utter horror. Time seemed to stall as the crowd milled around them, forming an oblivious background to the unfolding drama. Sofia held Alexander's gaze, tears shimmering but refusing to fall. She felt her entire world crumble in those few seconds, even though a part of her had known this outcome for weeks. Alexander, suddenly regaining his composure, attempted to extricate himself from Bethany's grip, but she clung to his arm, bewildered. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice rising above the din. Before Alexander could respond, Sofia stepped forward, her voice trembling with betrayal. "Are you going to introduce me to your new friend?" she asked, sarcasm dripping from every syllable. Bethany gaped, her expression morphing from confusion to realization as the truth hit her. This was Alexander's wife, pregnant with his child, standing before them in a heartbreakingly raw confrontation. Malcolm captured the moment on camera, the picture of a shocked husband, his glamorous mistress, and a heartbroken wife, carrying the product of a once hopeful marriage. In that snap of a shutter, the fragile lies Alexander had spun for months shattered irreparably. All the illusions of secrecy dissipated in an instant, leaving only the raw, brutal truth behind. A flurry of heated words erupted on the dock. Bethany, trembling and at a loss, looked to Alexander for an explanation he couldn't possibly give. Sofia, tears now streaming freely down her cheeks, unleashed weeks, no, months of pent-up anger and hurt. "How could you do this?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "We've been trying for a baby for years. We finally have a miracle on the way, and this is how you repay me." "By sneaking off with her." She jabbed a finger in Bethany's direction, though her real fury was reserved for Alexander. Alexander's voice caught in his throat. He stammered apologies, feeble attempts at denial, and contradictory statements all at once. The humiliation seared his face. He realized the gravity of his actions in stark clarity. Sofia, pregnant with his child, had discovered his betrayal in the most public, irreversible way. Onlookers, drawn by the commotion, began to gather. Some whispered, some openly gawked. The paparazzi, alerted by a tip from an unknown source, snapped photos from a distance, each flash immortalizing the downfall of a once idolized couple. Bethany found her own voice amidst the turmoil. She glared at Alexander, accusation burning in her eyes. "You said you were unhappy in your marriage, that you were practically separated, that you wanted a fresh start with me. You never told me she was pregnant." She spat the words, her face contorting with a mixture of betrayal and resentment. Her dream of a fairy tale romance was collapsing before her very eyes. She was mortified at having been so gullible, furious that Alexander had lied to her too. As tensions rose, Malcolm stepped forward, placing a protective arm around Sofia. She stumbled slightly, her pregnant belly making her unsteady. Carla joined them, shooting a murderous glare at Alexander. "You're a disgrace," Carla hissed, holding Sofia upright. "How dare you do this to her?" Alexander, plagued by shame, could only stare at Sofia, eyes pleading for forgiveness. He attempted to step closer, perhaps to comfort her or at least contain the damage. But Sofia recoiled, horrified at his touch. "You lost the right to touch me when you decided to betray me," she said, her voice cold. Bethany, meanwhile, tore the diamond bracelet from her wrist, one Alexander had gifted her during their trip, and flung it at his feet. The metal clinked loudly on the concrete. In that symbolic moment, her illusions shattered. She realized she was merely a disposable accessory to a man who had no qualms lying to anyone to get what he wanted. Security staff from the cruise liner approached, concerned about the heated altercation spilling over into the flow of passengers. Malcolm discreetly guided Sofia away from the crowd, taking her to Carla's nearby car. Bethany stormed off in another direction, tears in her eyes, furious at her own gullibility. Alexander, left standing alone, felt the weight of his sins suffocating him. The paparazzi flanked him, shouting provocative questions, capturing every second of his public downfall. In that moment, everything Alexander had built, his image, his marriage, the trust of those who admired him, lay in ruins. He stood on the brink of a reckoning that would soon grow even more crushing than he ever imagined. What followed was a cascade of consequences that toppled Alexander's carefully constructed empire. News of his affair spread like wildfire through social media and tabloid headlines. Publications that once heralded him as a genius entrepreneur now tore him apart for his moral failings. Stockholders in his companies began to panic, worried that his personal scandal would tarnish the brand. Rival investors launched smear campaigns, eager to exploit the opportunity to dethrone him in the competitive financial markets. In the days following the confrontation, Alexander tried frantically to contact Sofia. His calls and texts went unanswered. When he showed up at their Manhattan penthouse, he discovered Sofia had already taken her belongings and moved to a secure location, Carla's apartment, where he couldn't gain entry without permission. Every attempt to communicate with her met with silence or hostility. Through a lawyer's letter, Sofia made it clear she was filing for separation, citing his egregious breach of marital vows. Shaken and desperate, Alexander tried to reason with his board of directors, but the scandal was simply too big to contain. Several key partnerships withdrew, citing irreparable damage to corporate image. Banks tightened credit lines. Investors began short-selling shares of Alexander's flagship corporation. The empire he had built over decades cracked under the strain of public outrage and lost confidence. Meanwhile, Bethany faced her own backlash. She was quietly released from her job due to the scandal, as her employers felt her affair with a high-profile client posed reputational risks. The lavish gifts and perks disappeared, and she found herself struggling to pay the rent for her upscale Manhattan condo. Returning home to Indiana felt like a humiliating defeat, but staying in New York without Alexander's financial support proved untenable. Days turned into weeks, and Alexander sank into a deep despair. Rumors swirled that Sofia planned to move out of state for the remainder of her pregnancy, seeking to shield herself from media scrutiny. Alexander's lawyers cautioned him that divorce proceedings loomed, and likely a substantial alimony and child support judgment. Even so, the money was suddenly a secondary concern. What haunted him most was the realization that he had sacrificed the very foundation of his life for a fleeting dalliance, losing his wife, unborn child, and self-respect in one fell swoop. He remembered the day Sofia told him she was pregnant, the pure happiness that had shone in her eyes. He recalled their first kiss on a rooftop in Manhattan and the vows they exchanged in Tuscany. Now, all those memories felt like a cruel reminder of what he had thrown away. Night after night, he paced in his once glamorous penthouse, now eerily silent, haunted by thoughts of Sofia and their child. His attempts to beg for forgiveness were met with legal demands, not empathy. Then came the final blow. The news broke that Sofia had gone into early labor, triggered by stress. Although mother and child stabilized, doctors warned that emotional turmoil could escalate medical complications. Alexander wasn't even allowed at the hospital. He had relinquished his right to be a comforting presence in the most crucial moment of his child's arrival. He sat alone in his penthouse, staring at his phone, a bottle of scotch by his side, realizing too late that karma had come roaring back with a fury he would never escape. In the following months, life took on a grim new reality for Alexander. With his reputation in tatters, he fought to keep his companies afloat. Long-standing clients ended contracts, unwilling to be associated with his tarnished name. Lawsuits sprung up as opportunists seized on any contractual loophole to extract what they could from a wounded empire. Alexander found himself entangled in endless legal proceedings, hemorrhaging money at an alarming rate. Nevertheless, the most devastating blow arrived in the form of a custody battle. Sofia, having given birth to a baby boy she named Michael, sought sole custody. She cited Alexander's unstable behavior and the undue stress he had caused during her pregnancy. Her lawyers presented the damning evidence of his affair as proof of moral unfitness. Though Alexander insisted he would provide financial security for his child, the court was not swayed by wealth alone. Character references were called, detailing the emotional harm Sofia had endured. Malcolm Cole's photographs, along with testimonies from staff at the cruise and statements from Bethany herself, painted a stark portrait of Alexander's duplicity. Realizing that the court outcome looked bleak, Alexander attempted to reach out to Sofia privately. He penned letters expressing remorse and begged her to let him be part of Michael's life. He even offered to forego fighting any financial settlement if she would simply grant him visitation rights. Sofia, torn by old feelings of love and new anger at his betrayal, took her time. Ultimately, she allowed supervised visits, wanting Michael to at least know his father in some capacity, but only under strict conditions. The arrangement was not the paternal role Alexander had once imagined, cradling his newborn in a warm household with Sofia at his side. Instead, he found himself relegated to a small, sterile room with a court-appointed monitor, each visit a reminder of everything he had lost. Bethany, meanwhile, vanished from Alexander's life. She had no intention of clinging to a sinking ship, especially after she learned about Sofia's complicated pregnancy and how Alexander's lies extended to her as well. Hurt and disillusioned, she returned to Indiana, vowing to rebuild her life on her own terms. Occasionally, Alexander spotted her name in gossip columns. Reporters would mention how she was the other woman, but rarely delved deeper. Any empathy she might have harbored for Alexander dissipated under the weight of her own struggles. In a cruel twist, Alexander realized that even if he managed to salvage parts of his business empire, his personal losses were irrevocable. He would watch his child grow from the sidelines, restricted to awkward, timetabled visits. The penthouse that once symbolized his success now felt like a cavernous cage. The hush of rooms that had once hosted lavish parties was a daily reminder of his solitary existence. Occasionally, a fragment of hope stirred within him when Michael giggled or reached out a tiny hand during a supervised visit. But as soon as the session ended, Alexander was escorted to the door, forced to say goodbye until the next scheduled appointment. The final sting of karma was knowing that, for all the wealth and power he had chased, he was now a man living in the shadow of his own regret, his heart heavy with the knowledge that his choices had shattered the life he could have had. Time passed, as it always does. Sofia, determined to reclaim her life, channeled her energy into motherhood and personal growth. She sold the Manhattan penthouse, preferring a quieter home on the outskirts of the city where she could raise Michael without the constant buzz of paparazzi. The money from the settlement, along with her own savings, allowed her to invest in a small but promising marketing startup. She refused to dwell on the betrayal. Though the scar remained, she chose to focus on the future, finding solace in each milestone Michael achieved. Carla remained a steadfast friend, aiding Sofia in setting up a cozy nursery adorned with soft blues and whites. Sofia spent her days juggling the demands of single parenthood with her growing role at the startup. Each time she glanced at Michael's round face, she remembered why she had made every sacrifice to secure a brighter, healthier environment for her son. Her heartbreak over Alexander's affair transformed into a quiet resolve to give Michael the life he deserved. As for Alexander, he endured a drawn-out divorce process that ended with Sofia being awarded majority custody and a substantial monthly support order. By the time the dust settled, a fraction of Alexander's original wealth remained. His business empire, though still operational, was heavily fractured. No longer in the public's admiration, he rarely stepped out for galas or events. When he did, he carried the label of a scandalized mogul. The final blow to his pride came when he attempted to rebuild his tarnished image by announcing charitable donations to various causes. The public saw through his attempts, labeling them as desperate acts of atonement. Nevertheless, one of his donations actually funded a maternal care wing in a local hospital, something Sofia acknowledged as a worthy cause, even if it was motivated by guilt. Privately, Sofia hoped that some glimmer of genuine regret might spur Alexander to become a better person for Michael's sake. On a crisp autumn day, Alexander arrived at the Child Services Center for his supervised visit. Michael was now old enough to babble words. He could say "mama" quite clearly, and although he didn't yet understand who Alexander was, he sometimes reached out for a hug, trusting the gentle tone in his father's voice. The heartbreak and joy of these brief visits were almost unbearable for Alexander. After each one, he left with a hollow ache where hope tried and failed to take root. Weeks later, in a surprising turn, Sofia agreed to unsupervised daytime visits, provided Alexander attended counseling and demonstrated consistent responsibility. With a mixture of gratitude and anxiety, Alexander began therapy, confronting the selfishness that had driven him. He realized that genuine change required more than a public apology or a one-time donation. It required patience, humility, and unwavering commitment. By the time Michael turned 1, Alexander was granted more frequent visitation. Though still tenuous, it was a step forward. Karma had exacted its price in full, stripping Alexander of prestige and illusions. And yet, in the rubble, a small bud of redemption peeked through. Whether he could nurture it or not remained to be seen. Thank you for joining us on this roller coaster journey of love, betrayal, and redemption. Rich millionaire husband takes mistress on a cruise, but pregnant wife finds them out at port is a stark reminder that no amount of wealth can substitute for honesty and commitment. Our choices always carry consequences, sometimes crashing down upon us with a force we never anticipated. If you found this story gripping, please take a moment to like this video, share it with friends who appreciate dramatic storytelling, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating tales. Your support helps us continue creating stories that entertain, enlighten, and provoke thought. Let's remember that true happiness lies in loyalty, compassion, and respect. Thanks again for watching, and stay tuned for more dramatic adventures just around the corner. We'll see you next time.